Amongst the 3 million files released by the Department of Justice last week was an email from Jess Staley, the former CEO of Barclays, that perfectly captures the contempt the people implicated in the Epstein files had for ordinary people. In February 2014, while riots were erupting in Brazil over the spiraling cost of living and the billions being wasted on the FIFA World Cup, Staley sent a message to his friend Jeffrey Epstein, writing, "You want to know why we're not Sao Paulo? Watch the TV ads on the Super Bowl. It's all about hip blacks in hip cars with white women. The group that should be in the streets has been bought off by Jay-Z." It's a remarkably blunt admission of the disdain this circle had for the public. They saw a population so easily distracted by televised entertainment that they would ignore the fact that the people sending these emails were busy treating the world as their private playground. This is why people are now using the term the Epstein class to describe a protected tier of wealthy individuals who seem to operate under a completely different set of rules to everyone else. The sheer arrogance of this group was on full display this week during an interview on LBC Radio with a woman named Lady Victoria Hervey, who was a former girlfriend of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Andrew, of course, is the man who, despite all the young girls he kissed, managed to transform from a prince into a frog after his brother King Charles III stripped him of his titles and honours last year. Hervey suggested to the host that because Jeffrey Epstein knew everybody that was very powerful, not being named in the files should actually be considered an insult. She claimed that if your name isn't there, it simply means you're a bit of a loser. The radio host responded, "That's an astonishing attitude. I find that jaw-dropping," after Hervey confirmed with a laugh that her name had indeed come up in the files. I, of course, had to check for myself, and she is mentioned at least 20 times, mostly for her tweets and social photographs, including images of her with the US president and even the head of the FBI. This combination of absolute disdain for regular people, the fact that so many of these figures still occupy key roles in society, and the public realization that a cover-up is still being actively maintained, has turned these documents into a political explosion. While the distractions are keeping many occupied, a bipartisan group in Congress has finally started calling out the names that were never supposed to be redacted. While the Department of Justice points to the 3.5 million documents released as proof of their commitment to transparency, the members of Congress who wrote the law have described the situation as a farce. An obvious issue is that the Department of Justice originally identified over 6 million documents as falling under the Act, yet only about half of that number have actually made it into the public domain. When we look into the files, we can see an FBI email from June 2020 where an investigator wrote that they expect the data collected to be between 20 and 40 terabytes. So far, only 300 gigabytes of data has been released, about 1.5% of the total collected. The missing data isn't just redundant paperwork, it's at the heart of the investigation. Congressmen have demanded the release of the FBI FD 302 victim interview statements. These are detailed written summaries of interviews conducted by FBI agents with witnesses, victims, and associates in criminal cases. These documents provide a summary of what victims told the government before potential plea deals, years of legal delays, or the case became national news, offering a direct view into what the Justice Department knew early on. There appears to be only one FD 302 statement in the files that have been released, and it's almost entirely blacked out. The files that have been made available lack the most basic investigative context. We see reports of criminal behavior, but no notes from investigators indicating whether these reports were ever followed up on, whether anyone was interviewed, or why certain leads were rejected as being false or unreliable. We know that Jeffrey Epstein was first reported to the FBI by the Farmer sisters 30 years ago, but the records of what the Bureau actually did with that information remain entirely hidden. This tension came to a head on Monday when a small group of lawmakers became the first to enter a secure office to view the unredacted versions of these files. Among them were the bill's co-sponsors, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, who spent 2 hours in a room without phones or staff, allowed only to take handwritten notes. Before we dig into their findings, let me tell you about this week's video sponsor, Saley, an eSIM provider who makes it incredibly easy to travel and stay connected without having to pay ridiculous foreign roaming charges, find a local SIM card, or ruin your trip searching around for public Wi-Fi networks. I hadn't heard of this technology before trying out Saley this summer, but it's an app that you install on your phone which allows you to stay connected in over 200 places around the world. There's no need to buy and swap physical SIM cards. You just download the app once and use it whenever you're traveling. You choose how much data you want and for how long. It's way cheaper than roaming and takes just seconds to set up. You just select the country and plan and activate an eSIM before you leave home. When you land, your phone automatically connects to a local network with no hidden charges. There's no fussing around at the airport. You can book an Uber, access GPS, or make a call. So if you're traveling soon, get an exclusive 15% discount on Saley data plans. Download the Saley app and use the code Boyle at checkout. It's worth noting that the 535 members of Congress were allocated just 4 computers between them to go through the unredacted files, which seems entirely inadequate to begin with, especially when there are 3.5 million files to go through. Representative Jamie Raskin calculated that with just 4 computers, it would take the legislative branch 7.5 years to go through the whole archive. What the congressmen found in less than 2 hours of research confirmed their worst suspicions. Despite the law's strict limits on redactions, the files that they were viewing, the supposedly unredacted ones, were still full of black ink. Massie and Khanna learned that the FBI had already scrubbed many of the records before they even reached the DOJ lawyers, a move that directly violated the Epstein Files Transparency Act. In just those 2 hours, the pair identified at least 6 men who the FBI at one point were concerned were Epstein co-conspirators, whose identities had been inappropriately hidden for no apparent legal reason. Khanna later noted the absurdity of the situation. If 2 members of Congress could uncover a cover-up for 6 prominent men in just 2 hours, it raises a terrifying question about what is still being hidden in the millions of pages they didn't have time to examine. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared in front of the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee on Wednesday to defend the Justice Department's handling of the files, which quickly descended into a shouting match. While many were distracted by the insults being fired back and forth, a Reuters photographer captured this image of a page from Pam Bondi's prepared book of insults, which she used to counter any questions from lawmakers. This photo demonstrates that the DOJ monitored members of Congress's searches of the unredacted Epstein files, implying that Bondi has put more effort into investigating the people reading the files rather than those suspected of child abuse in the files. There's obviously no legitimate investigative purpose for the DOJ to be tracking the oversight activities of the legislative branch for the purposes of weaponizing that information for political point scoring. The DOJ has no legitimate reason to secretly track what members of Congress who have oversight authority over the Justice Department are searching. The craziest moment of the testimony came when Bondi was pressed on why the DOJ was protecting potential co-conspirators. Instead of answering the question she was asked, she pivoted to a rant about the rising stock market.
The Dow right now is over The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000. And the NASDAQ smashing records. Americans' 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about.
Now, that would have been a great answer if Pam Bondi headed up the Department of the Stock Market, but instead she heads up the Department of Justice. It's a bold strategy to say it's okay that we're hiding sex traffickers because your 401k is up. Apparently, in the current Justice Department, a bull market is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. On Monday, after spending 2 hours in the secure evidence room, Congressmen Massey and Khanna emerged and spoke to the press, expressing their deep disappointment with how the redactions had been handled. They revealed that they had identified at least half a dozen men who were being protected by over-redactions, individuals they believed were potentially incriminated by their inclusion in the files, and names that should have been left unredacted by the DOJ in compliance with the law. The lawmakers initially gave the Justice Department a chance to fix the mistake, but when the department remained evasive, Ro Khanna took to the House floor the following day. Using the speech or debate clause of the Constitution, which allows lawmakers to speak freely without the threat of defamation lawsuits, he read the 6 names into the congressional record, unmasking the individuals the FBI and DOJ had tried to keep in the shadows. The first name is Leslie Wexner. The 88-year-old billionaire behind Victoria's Secret was more than just an associate of Epstein's. He was the man responsible for most of Epstein's wealth. While their ties were already known, the bombshell here was that an internal FBI document, which the DOJ had inappropriately redacted, explicitly listed Wexner as a potential co-conspirator. Wexner's legal team maintains that he was viewed only as a source of information and never as a target. The second name is Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, the CEO of the global logistics giant DP World. The unredacted records reveal a series of explicit emails between Sulayem and Epstein, dated as late as 2019, years after Epstein's first conviction. Most disturbing is an email Epstein sent to the Sultan in which he wrote that he loved the torture video. We currently have no information on what that video depicted. As for the other 4 names, we have to be extremely careful with identification. While Ro Khanna read them out, most major news organizations have struggled to confirm their backgrounds. One of these names was Nicola Caputo. While an Italian politician bears this name, there's no verified evidence linking him to Epstein. Congressman Thomas Massey has cautioned that the person in the files is likely not the former MEP. According to Massey, the birth year for the Nicola Caputo in the files suggests that he's more than 10 years older than the Italian politician, who has himself flatly denied any involvement. The names Salvatore Novara, Zurab Michaelidze, and Leonik Leonev appear in the files alongside their photographs. However, their specific roles or connections to Epstein's operation have not yet been established. Now, we must be clear here, appearing in these files does not prove criminal guilt. But as Ro Khanna pointed out, the real scandal isn't just that these men are in the files, it's that the government went to such lengths to make sure their names were never disclosed, despite the fact that the law required their disclosure. When Ro Khanna read Leslie Wexner's name on the House floor, he wasn't just identifying a business associate. He was identifying the man whose resources essentially built the entire Epstein operation. For decades, Wexner was Epstein's only known major financial client. Starting in 1991, Wexner granted Epstein a full power of attorney, giving Epstein complete control over his vast personal fortune. Now, a power of attorney is a somewhat standard tool, but it's typically used for specific limited transactions, such as giving a financial advisor the right to trade stocks on your behalf or to make specific decisions for a client if they're incapacitated. It's almost unheard of for a billionaire in full command of his faculties to hand over such sweeping, unchecked rights to a financial advisor, especially one he's not known for very long. This arrangement allowed Epstein to act as Wexner's legal alter ego, with virtually no oversight. Epstein appears to have taken full advantage of this, frequently buying property on behalf of the Wexners and then selling it to himself for a fraction of the price. This is how Epstein acquired his famous Manhattan townhouse and even a private plane, both purchased from Wexner at deeply discounted prices. For years, the narrative from the Wexner camp was that he had been a victim of a master manipulator who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from him. But the newly unredacted files reveal a $100 million complication. In 2008, the exact same year Epstein was in a Florida jail for soliciting sex from a minor, Epstein reportedly paid Wexner a $100 million private settlement. According to the report from U.S. prosecutors, this massive repayment was kept quiet because the Wexners didn't want to bring unnecessary public attention to the issue. It's a staggering amount of money to change hands in the shadows while one party is serving a jail sentence for sex crimes against a minor. For years, Wexner's legal team has told the public that the Department of Justice viewed him merely as a source of information and explicitly not a target. But the newly unredacted files reveal a massive disconnect. Inside an internal FBI document from 2019, the very one the DOJ tried to keep hidden, the Bureau explicitly listed Leslie Wexner as a potential co-conspirator in a child sex trafficking investigation. We don't actually know the department's specific reasoning for redacting his name, as under the law they were only supposed to redact the names of victims. But this is the exact kind of inconsistency that has turned these files into a political lightning rod. While the American government was busy redacting names, other countries were actually paying attention. The second name Ro Khanna unmasked was Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, the 71-year-old CEO of the global logistics giant DP World. The file showed that bin Sulayem's final message to Epstein was sent on the day of Epstein's arrest in 2019. It contained an attachment that we can't open. The messages between them were not just professional messages. They were unusually personal and, frankly, disturbing. They traded images of women that they were involved with and shared contact lists for escort and massage services across various cities. Most damningly, the files detail bin Sulayem helping to arrange training for a masseuse from Epstein's private spa. In a September 2015 exchange, he emailed Epstein to describe a renewed relationship with a foreign exchange student in Dubai in intimate and boastful terms. The email chain where Epstein tells the Sultan, "I loved the torture video," seems to have gotten the most attention and seems to have been the breaking point. We still don't know what that video he was referring to depicted, but we now know the consequences of being linked to it. As I'm sitting down to record this, the FT just reported that bin Sulayem has been replaced as chair and CEO of DP World. The Dubai government didn't actually mention him by name in their press release, they just announced the names of the people replacing him. This comes after massive pressure from international partners like Canada's La Caisse and the UK's British International Investment, both of whom froze billions in future deals with the group until required actions were taken by the group. It turns out that in most of the world, being a most trusted friend of Jeffrey Epstein has now become a terminal liability. It's a stunning fall from grace for a man who's often credited with helping to build modern Dubai, and it happened because international pension funds have a lower tolerance for torture videos than the US Department of Justice does. This pattern of the DOJ saying one thing in public while the files suggest something else isn't limited to American billionaires. It extends to the very heart of the British establishment, too. The files reveal that Lord Peter Mandelson, a former British government minister, appears to have shared sensitive, confidential government information with Epstein regarding the Eurozone crisis. Mandelson also reportedly offered advice on how JP Morgan Chase, one of Epstein's key banking links, might lobby the British government. This raises an obvious question. Did Epstein use this inside information to trade? We don't know because the FBI has released almost none of Epstein's financial information, and there's no evidence that they ever investigated Mandelson for these leaks. We see this same investigative vacuum when it comes to the former Prince Andrew, whose title has been stripped away and now he's just known as Andy the Nonce. The files contain photographs and a short video clip of Andy with what appears to be a teenage girl, yet they offer zero information on whether he was investigated by US law enforcement. There are no notes provided, no interview transcripts, and no explanation as to why these leads were seemingly abandoned. The silence in the US is being met with a roar in the UK. King Charles III, or KC3 as I like to call him, has officially announced that he's ready to help police investigations into his brother after British authorities confirmed that they're investigating Andrew's links to Jeffrey Epstein. Once again, the world is moving forward while the US Department of Justice stays frozen in time. If we want to understand why there is so much frustration about a lack of consequences in the US, we need to look no further than Howard Lutnick, the current US Commerce Secretary. Up until a week ago, Lutnick's public story was one of moral outrage. He claimed that after a single tour of Epstein's Manhattan home in 2005, he was so disgusted by the sight of a massage table that he vowed to never be in a room with that man again. But the 2026 files have shown that story to be a total fiction. It came out in the files that Lutnick and his family visited Epstein on his private island in 2012, 7 years after he claimed to have cut all ties and 4 years after Epstein's Florida plea deal. He was quizzed about this during a Senate Commerce Committee hearing this week.
Secretary Lutnick, I think you understand the root of concern here. It's the way you described very emphatically your first encounter with him in his apartment, said you were disgusted, would never have any contact with him again. Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children.
It was probably wise to do a headcount check before leaving that island. While Lutnick continues to minimize his connection to Epstein, the files reveal that Lutnick and Epstein were in business together as recently as 2014, where each of them signed on behalf of limited liability companies that agreed in late 2012 to acquire stakes in a now shuttered advertising technology company called AdFin. Lutnick also invited Epstein to an intimate fundraising event for Hillary Clinton in 2015. Despite these clear misrepresentations to the public and to Congress, Lutnick remains in his post. As the channel Voidzilla pointed out, he's frequently seen laughing and chuckling whenever the Epstein case is brought up in public, treating the entire scandal like a joke rather than a horrific criminal conspiracy, one that a Republican lawmaker has described as being bigger than Watergate. For now, in the US, it seems that lying about your ties to a sex trafficker isn't a career ender, it's just another Tuesday in Washington. This lack of individual accountability is backed up by an institutional one. As Thomas Massey discovered, the redaction process itself appears to have been rigged from the start. Massey noted that the files the DOJ was supposed to be reviewing arrived at their office already scrubbed by the FBI. This suggests that the Bureau acted as a primary filter, removing names before the Transparency Act's rules could even be applied by the DOJ. This points a finger directly at FBI Director Kash Patel. Despite his claims to be a transparency advocate, Patel told Congress that the FBI's files contained no information, none, that would warrant an investigation into anyone else. This was an incredible statement given what we're looking at. We have emails discussing torture videos, photos of a prince with a teenager, and internal documents labeling billionaires as co-conspirators, yet the head of the FBI is telling the American people that there's nothing else to see. Patel's insistence that the case is closed for everyone but Epstein and Maxwell is the ultimate institutional wall. While the rest of the world is firing CEOs and launching police probes, the US security apparatus is telling us that Jeffrey Epstein was essentially a one-man conspiracy, that he was trafficking girls to himself. The most damning example remains the Farmer sisters. We know that they reported Epstein to the FBI 30 years ago in 1996, but the records of what the Bureau actually did with that information for the next 3 decades under 5 different presidents remain entirely hidden. We're shown the crimes, but the justice part of the Department of Justice remains redacted. It's as if the FBI is saying, we saw it, we wrote it down, and then we decided to do nothing. As we look at the fallout from this massive but still partial data dump, it's clear that Jay-Z and the Super Bowl halftime show is no longer enough to keep the public from looking at what's going on around them. We now have a situation where the names of the wealthy, powerful, suspected co-conspirators are being read into the congressional record, while the systems designed to protect them are being exposed in real time. We're also witnessing a split-screen reality. In the UK, Canada, and Dubai, billionaire CEOs are losing their jobs within hours of their names being released, and royal families are opening the doors to investigators. Meanwhile, the response in the US has felt like a retreat into the absurd. This week we learned that while victims are still fighting for the basic unredacted truth, Ghislaine Maxwell declined to answer a single question from the House lawmakers in a deposition, but indicated that if President Donald Trump ended her prison sentence, she was willing to testify that neither he nor former President Bill Clinton had done anything wrong in their connections with Epstein. It's worth remembering that days after agreeing to a private conversation with one of the highest-ranking members of the Justice Department, Ghislaine Maxwell was transferred to a minimum security federal prison camp where she gets custom-made meals and is allowed to have a puppy. As a convicted sex offender, she is not eligible to be kept in a minimum security prison. No explanation has been given for that upgrade. While government officials have been fighting tooth and nail to keep the details of Epstein's crimes and the names of his accomplices private, the sheer volume of public outrage has meant that some of the black ink is starting to fade. Some of the names have been released, and some of the data has been made public. The thing that is so hard to understand is why there are no investigations. We have the 3 million pages of the what, but we're still waiting on the Department of Justice to show us the why. Until they release the actual FBI files, the 302 statements, and the proof of what they actually did with 30 years of investigation, and until the financial data is made public too, the transparency that we've been promised will remain exactly what the lawmakers called it, a farce. If you found this video interesting, you should watch my video on YouTube censorship next. Don't forget to check out our sponsor Saley using the link in the description, and see you in the next video. Bye.